Thank you all for coming. I think we just had a really remarkable opening session with some very strong presenters from very different rich views in the creation and history of ICANN, particularly from the North American perspective, since the meeting is held here. I'll make some very brief remarks and then we'll take your questions. Every speaker this morning hammered home the same thought, and that is that the multi-stakeholder model is fundamental to the Internet's future, and that model is working. More people are participating and making their voices heard, and this meeting is a good example of that. This is the largest meeting in ICANN's history. And this multi-stakeholder participation is critical to the Internet's continued success. That sends a powerful signal that the multi-stakeholder model is not only alive, but it's thriving and it's evolving, and it's in a very healthy state. Ira Magaziner put things in perspective when he said the Internet is flourishing because of the model. We see this expressed at the meeting. This is not only our largest meeting, but there's more different meetings taking place, and we have 1,783 registrations so far as you walked into the room today, beating the record that was in the 1,600s before, and more registrations are still coming in. Again, let me welcome you, and we look forward to, Peter and I, Peter Dengate-Thrush, Chairman of ICANN, look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Hi, Kevin Murphy, Domain Insight. Rod, in your speech just now, you talked about a belief that the US government should live up to its 1998 white paper commitment to transfer management of IANA to ICANN. I was wondering if that's your belief.
Clearly, it's my belief, or I wouldn't have stated it. I mean, I think that's the view of this community, and we think when I like to talk about the long-term evolution of the Internet and the governance structures, I say the Internet was born as a 100% U.S. government creation. It was specifically a Department of Defense classified project. That was its birth in the late 60s. It is evolving to becoming 100% global, and I think that's well illustrated by Andrew McLaughlin's diagram when he showed how penetration rates or connectivity is growing all around the world, and with 2 billion people using it today and many more billion in the future. So it's becoming 100% global. It's not there. There's still a skewed distribution. The governance structures of the Internet, including ICANN, but also others, are evolving along the curve behind the actual spread of the network and the devices, in my view. And so I think there's a long-term arc towards the ecosystem bodies becoming entirely global. And I think that visionary statement that was embodied in the green paper and the white paper are the right aspirations for us to have in the long term. And we certainly hope that we keep making progress along that as we pass each key milestone, such as the current IANA evolution.
We have a question from Sean Kerner online from Internet News. Mr. Strickland has been critical of ICANN living up to its mandate. After his comments this morning, what will be discussed this week? Do you feel confident that you will address the Department of Commerce's concerns?
Let me start with that. First of all, we welcome that kind of criticism. As Larry Strickling said in his very good speech, I thought, this morning, we should never be afraid of frank and robust discussion, and that includes frequent and regular reviews of the way we're performing. And he took part and put a great deal of effort into his participation in the Accountability and Transparency Review team itself, and as he said, that gave him an opportunity to do a deep dive into some of these aspects. And so the Transparency Review team recommendations are there for the board to consider. We're doing that, and as he said, as Rod has said in his response, in part, the board is looking at that at this meeting and has to have a full program sorted out by June. So I think the answer is we're well on track to dealing with the ATRT recommendations.
Peter, bottom line, how likely is it that the board will vote to open up new GTLD applications on Friday?
Well, I think we've already given the Government Advisory Committee the commitment that we won't be launching the program here in San Francisco. What we are doing is moving that program forward through a great deal of consultation with the Governmental Advisory Committee on the 12 areas they signalled disagreement with us in Cartagena. So the real exercise is to try and work as hard as we can with the Governmental Advisory Committee and the community, and there's a session with the community for 3 hours this afternoon working through that very question. So that will be the progress that we will see in this meeting, is to try and get through the issues that the Government Advisory Committee has raised.
With reference to the cancellation of the meeting in Jordan, obviously, there'll be various people who are very disappointed about that, etc. How do you feel about the choice of the venues for meetings? For example, I know that in Nairobi, ICANN had to spend an awful lot of money on security, and Nairobi was a fantastic meeting. And I know that you want diversity, and it's important to go to all of these peoples, but maybe should ICANN decide just to have the meetings in international hubs, or I'm just pondering on the thought.
Sure. First, I think many people were disappointed that we were not able to, or chose not to do the event in Jordan in June. I'm certainly disappointed.
Me too.
And the board, I love Jordan as a country. I've been there many times. I have many dear friends in the country, and I was really looking forward to it. It was very simply, primarily logistical questions that came up. We were concerned about transportation in the region, and just there were geopolitical developments in the region far outside of our control. And we did hear concerns from community members, and we thought if we're going to consider changing the venue, let's do it early so that people can make appropriate plans once and not have to change it. So we discussed that with the hosts in Jordan. They were disappointed, but I think they understood. And we're very pleased that Singapore has stepped forward and offered to host. And we're very excited to have the event there with respect to the philosophy of having meetings. And, I personally was involved in massive efforts to keep Nairobi on track, and in personally getting engaged to make sure that we were taking additional security measures to address community members' concerns, and additional measures to be as transparent and accountable as possible about any information that we received concerning risks and threats. And we pulled the event off, and it was successful, and we're very grateful for that, and very grateful to the Kenyans. Our philosophy is that we need to do meetings all around the world, in regions and developing countries and more developed countries, but the internet's everywhere. What we do have to have is the logistical framework to pull off these rather large meetings with a lot of small meeting rooms and components, and a range of hotel prices and qualities. There's a broad set of factors, and as the meetings get larger, unfortunately, that does make it a bit more difficult to go to some cities that may not have the same hotel and conference infrastructure that others do. But we certainly would like to consider Jordan as a site in the future if they're willing to host again, and we remain, as always, dedicated to going and being wherever the internet is in those regions, given appropriate logistics and given appropriate support from the local industry and government.
Does ICANN have any contingency for people who have actually bought tickets to go to Jordan, for example, and their insurance companies want nothing to know about it?
No, we don't. We're not able to. We're not engaged in the travel plans of individuals, and I don't think would seek to be.
Sure. Just if I could build on what Rhoda said about you mentioned the hubs. Just remember that this is a reasonably constant inquiry at ICANN. Former Director Susan Crawford led a team 3 or 4 years ago, including some quite good consultations with the community, and that's been now taken up by the Public Participation Committee that is responsible for ensuring that the best methods are used for engaging with the community. And they are looking at that. The suggestion of going to hubs has been looked at a couple of times, and in the end, people shy away from it. Although it has transport and other admin convenience, it in the end restricts us really to the developed world. And there's a sense that we really do need, as Rhoda said, we want to go to more places than simply the large hubs.
We have a question on the telephone from Monica Emmert, a journalist who's covered us for a very long time from Munich, Germany. Monica?
Hi, hello to you all in San Francisco. I have 2 questions, actually. One, the Assistant Secretary spoke about, it was Lynn Turf who spoke about a cooperative agreement instead of a procurement procedure that might be possible for the future. How could that look like from your point of view? And then the second one, the Assistant Secretary spoke about let consensus rule, so try to get consensus and only then act as a board. So what if consensus is not possible, as we have seen it for years with the new TLD? What can you do then? And a very small administrative thing, I asked by email already, why are the open GAC sessions not streamed anymore, so the constituency GAC meetings? Thanks.
I'll take the first question there, Monica. Guten Tag. And then I'll let Peter help answer the others. With respect to a cooperative agreement, one of the advantages of that type of structure is that it can be of a longer term duration than a procurement contract, which has typically a shorter duration. And I'm not if we want more deep legal and political insight, I have Jamie Hedlund here as our VP of Government Affairs Americas, who can comment on more depth on the very specific differences. But a cooperative agreement, for example, is used between NTIA and VeriSign. We simply feel it's a more appropriate vehicle. One of the reasons is in the American statutes, or as the procurement contracts are described, they must be managed for the benefit of the American public. But the internet is a global resource. And clearly ICANN's task, and Department of Commerce acknowledges this in the affirmation of commitments and in many other statements, that we must act in the global public interest, and they will as well in dealing with us, which we appreciate. But the procurement contract is fairly narrow in scope, usually used just with a contractor that's providing a service, and a cooperative agreement seems more befitting of the type of relationship that ICANN and NTIA have developed. And again, if you want to drill deeper, I'm happy to hand it over to Jamie, but right now I'd like to hand it over to Peter to address the latter part of your first question on consensus on the board, and then the second question regarding the GAC consultations.
Yes, the issue really there is what happens, hello Monica, as I understand your question, it's really picking up the point that Larry said that we should strive always for consensus, and when the board steps in, that has the capacity to destabilise the multi-stakeholder model. We of course agree with that. I particularly agree with that and helped draft the CCNSO bylaws, for example, under which the board cannot do that. So recommendations coming through from the CCNSO, the board is not able to remake those. It has to, if it disagrees, it has to remand them to the CCNSO. So the principle's deep, if you like, in the bylaws of ICANN. The difficulty, of course, is, as always, the practicalities, and the recent example involves an issue where the GNSO itself was, despite many efforts, a working group set up, lots of reports, lots of consultation, going back to them several times with further requests, etc. The GNSO in the end was unable to rule on or advise on a particular issue. And that's a consequence in some cases of the structure itself. The miracle, if you like, or the really great thing about the ICANN model is that in the GNSO we have in one room making the policy the providers and their customers. And we've got around the antitrust issues that are often associated with that. So in the same place we've got the people doing the provisioning, the people doing the purchasing, and the people doing the supplying some of the infrastructure. And that's where that policy is supposed to come. Now the voting in that is actually balanced between providers and consumers. And when they are unable to agree, we effectively have a structural problem. And the board is, in my view, then the appropriate body to step in and make a decision. We do that only very reluctantly. We do it only when we are convinced that the multi-stakeholder model has reached, in fact, a deadlock, as we reached on that particular case. So yes, as a matter of principle, we strongly support it. On very rare occasions, we find the board has to step in and act.
I'm Joe Mann with the Financial Times, and I have a question on security. A lot of criminals have transparently bogus WHOIS information, and many more now are flocking to privacy-protecting registrations, which makes law enforcement's job more difficult. From a high-level view, how do you see ICANN working on those issues?
One of the reasons I encouraged additional law enforcement to come and attend our policy work this week in today's session and onward is to get law enforcement more engaged in ICANN policy development so that they're helping to shape the kind of policies they want to see as opposed to just being downstream consumers. Because I think that law enforcement has a lot of legitimate concerns And I have a background, I've worked in law enforcement for a while. I worked for the Department of Homeland Security, so I'm sympathetic to their concerns. At the same time, there are other civil rights and liberties groups out there advocating for privacy rights. The reality is that the ICANN policies today do allow for proxies, okay? And it's allowed in the policies. There are different initiatives underway at ICANN for the evolution of different WHOIS policies. In addition, there's discussion about what's called the RAA agreement, the agreement that ICANN has with registrars, which may also add additional WHOIS requirements. And that's a very touchy and sensitive part of the negotiations amongst the parties and groups that are involved in that contract negotiation. So I think this is an example of where there are different stakeholders that have different views, and we need to seek to enrich the stakeholder processes so all the voices come together and that they work together on consensus policies and processes for the board to consider.
Recently, there's been a lot of criticism, including in the mainstream media, of the board. So the Washington Post headline was, Obama administration joins critics of US nonprofit group that oversees internet. And then at the recent meetings with governments in Brussels, you, Peter, started off by dismissing those accounts, saying, despite some indications in some of the media, this is not going to be an adversarial session. But by all accounts, that's what the meeting became. And what's more, several governments were quite blunt in their belief that the board was not taking the GAC seriously. And on top of that, several well-respected community members, and just now the US Commerce Secretary, publicly raising their concern that you're not actually listening to people, but simply dismissing genuine concerns under this cover of community views and sort of blustering ahead, even to the extent that you're pushing the US government on the IANA contract. So the question is, are you right and everyone else is wrong?
Well, there's a whole lot of stuff tied up in that, Keir, isn't there? There's, first of all, you're quoting from some headlines where I think one of those headlines was caused by the apparent leaking of the US position on some of these things, which wasn't in the end adopted by the GAC itself. So something that the US was pushing forward wasn't taken up by the GAC, and that was the idea that the US itself was floating, much to most people's surprise, is that individual countries should have a veto in the process. And of course, Larry Strickling's made it clear that he doesn't support that, and in fact the GAC itself didn't support that. So I'm not sure that the headline itself is much more than what some journalists like to you know, they try and find something controversial or provocative to say when there isn't really the substance behind it. Are we listening? Well, yeah, the answer is of course we are. We've had an extraordinary amount of work done in preparation for the Brussels consultation. The consultation itself was novel. And dealt with the issues that the GAC had alerted us to in Cartagena. And of course, the detail of some of that was brand new. There's a sort of a suggestion coming out that these are just all old things that we've been unable to resolve when they're not. The sort of stuff we're discussing with the GAC now is quite a lot of it, quite a lot more advanced than what came out originally. And I think most people, contrary to what you said, Kieran, I think most people, most GAC representatives and certainly the board and the staff at the Brussels meeting felt that the meeting was very productive, that the tone was very productive, that the exchanges were very helpful, they were courteous, and that we've moved those issues substantially forward. As a matter of detail, we've taken a third now of the GAC advice and made it quite clear that we agree with that completely and will be implementing that. That's the 1As in our rating system. Another third, we've agreed with the principle and need to work on the implementation. That's the 1Bs. And so if you like, we're down to a third of the issues now as being where we've indicated we're not going to be able to accept the advice and given reasons for that. So I think the matter has been very, very productive. I think it's fairly clear that we are listening and that the GAC has come to this meeting ready to continue the process. And we've invited the GAC to participate with us this afternoon in more community consultation so that there can be more exchanges and more listening. So I think the record on that speaks for itself.
I just want to share, I've heard a lot of very positive remarks from different members of the GAC following the consultations, and as always, the range of opinions spans the spectrum, or the rainbow, as you wish, in ICANN. And I just want to briefly come back to Joe as well with some additional specifics. We're currently undergoing a significant WHOIS accuracy study, which is being commissioned. We're making technical changes to WHOIS and discussing protocol changes with different bodies. We're working on tougher compliance. And there's also a formal AOC review team, which is called the WHOIS Review Team, which is a group selected from the multi-stakeholder community that are investigating the policies and the implementation in the WHOIS space. So there's a lot of project and a lot of people and resources involved inside ICANN, as well as staff, as well as the community working on these issues. But we'd like to have more, and we really would like to see more law enforcement officials and policymakers from around the world who care about WHOIS coming and joining our policy development process and discussions. Thank you.
Charmaine Childers, freelance journalist from London. Do you think it's fair that applicants in the new GTLD process, some of whom have already invested significant funds, still have no real clarity on the application timeline? Second part to the question, can you provide any more insight into the numbers of new GTLD applicants you're expecting on the first round?
You know, I think we did one study of the volume that we could handle. We don't have a specific forecast. I mean, these are the private plans of private participants and public participants out in the world that might be registering for new GTLDs. So we chose not to do an expression of interest around a year and a half ago. That would have been a way to formally gauge numerically and quantitatively the potential demand in a more rigorous fashion. There are third parties out there that have taken stabs and estimates, and you need to find their resources online. If you want any more details about the internal documents that we've developed for our ability to handle different loads, then I will hand this over to Kurt Pritz, who's our Senior Vice President of Stakeholder Relations and who's been leading the internal efforts on new GTLDs.
I wanted to get back to my point, which was whether you're actually listening to people or dismissing their concerns. So you said that you felt that the GAC members were happy with how it's progressing. So I thought I'd pull some quotes, and Norway said, "We feel that you are not taking the government side seriously." And the US said, "We need some actual demonstrable evidence, credible evidence that when the GAC provides advice, ICANN is seen to be accepting that advice and to be working with it." And the UK said the future of ICANN is at stake in these discussions. So my point was that there's some very strong language, particularly for governments, coming out, and you're saying, no, it's fine, they're happy, but what they're saying is, we aren't happy.
I'm not sure that's a question. That's a statement of your view of your perception of the consultations.
But no, I directly quote them. Norway says, "We feel you are not taking the government side seriously," and the US says, "We need some actual demonstrable credible evidence that when the GAC provides advice, ICANN is seen to be accepting that advice." So it's not my word, it's their words.
What I suggest is that you ask those people. I'm not going to comment again about what individual people have said. Talk to those people about their view about the consultation, and I'm sure you'll find that they are feeling that the productive efforts have been made and that we've moved forward on these issues. The fact that we've taken a third of their things and turned them into a 1A is an indication, even surely, that there's been some consultation and some listening, and that 1B is, again, another third of their things we've agreed with the principal and are going to work with them on the implementation. So of their objections, 2/3 of them we have substantially agreed with. So how we can describe that as not making progress, I'm not quite sure.
And if may I contribute, Kieran? You know, I think it's about how we walk, not about how we talk. And the reality is 20 ICANN board members flew to Brussels, taking on average 6+ days of their time just on that trip, a day in, a day out, 4 days at the session, 1 day of prep, 2 days of the meeting, one following, and 60 members of the GAC from, I understand, roughly 30-something different countries. and $500,000 in expenditure in hosting the event and global streaming and enormous preparation. And the ICANN board had 8 different project teams working on preparing the detailed ICANN positions, and the GAC spent a huge amount of work in their 28. So I mean, just the collective effort, whether you measure it by pounds of paper or by hours spent in airports or dollars spent, it's very clear the Government Advisory Committee is being taken seriously. And Larry Strickling, Assistant Secretary Strickling, has shared with me directly that he was very pleased overall with how it goes. That doesn't mean that some individuals at some point in times won't be critical. I think they certainly will, and that's a very healthy part of the process. But clearly, it is the first time we held such a dedicated meeting separately outside an ICANN meeting, and great resources and efforts went into it. And I think many parties are appreciative, and some might have different views. I think you might also want to review Assistant Secretary Strickling's transcripts this morning. My sense is that his comments were quite positive overall about the Brussels GAC meeting.
We've got a question on the phone from Michael Singer, who is with Internet Evolution here in San Francisco. Michael?
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking the call. And what is your assessment of the conversion and adoption of IPv6? How is the education process coming along? And what else needs to be done before ICANN is fully satisfied with the conversion and adoption?
Sure. Sure. Thank you very much for the question about IPv6 and adoption. Clearly, we see the adoption accelerating, and you know, a very simple data point is we measure traffic to the ICANN.org website, and whether it's initiated or coming through IPv4 or IPv6. In the last half of last year alone, it grew from about 1% IPv6 to about 7%. Now, granted, the community that accesses ICANN.org is perhaps a little more technologically advanced and savvy than others. And I also want to explain that our role in IPv6 is really, you know, we're the global, you know, allocation body in fulfilling the IANA function. And while we play some role in advocating IPv6 adoption, we really rely upon our partners such as ISOC. The Internet Society has a very aggressive program, has different educational initiatives around the world. I think they've got a conference that's coming up this summer. ISOC is very active in this through their chapters around the world and through global efforts they coordinate. We applaud that. Also, the regional Internet registries, the 5 groups around the world that do the allocation in the geographies, they are very active in this issue because they're the direct parties that allocate IPv6 to the organizations that are their members. So ICANN's role in IPv6 adoption is we have a technical coordination role where we're very active because we have a unique role and we must and we do fulfill it. We are less active than other specialist organizations and addresses and less active than our partner ISOC, and we're really deeply appreciative of their good efforts. And I think you might want to speak to them about what they're up to.
Thanks, Michael. Just to add to that, yes, Rod's distinguished, if you like, our role as the coordinator from the information and distribution role that others play. We've in fact decided at this meeting already that we will be supporting the ISOC IPv6 Day, the kind of project that they're doing. And we've also taken part, and we will take part any time we get an invitation where our technical role and the information we can provide about our technical role is requested. And I did that, for example, a couple of months ago on a technical panel in Washington, D.C., where the US government was leading efforts to increase IPv6 adoption in the United States. So we are doing those kinds of activities, but as Rod said, our role is the coordination of the distribution, and we work with others, in particular in relation to information exercises.
Dawn Yankeelev with Tech Republic. I'm interested in the expenditure side. I believe that when the new GTLDs are delegated, tremendous amounts of money are going to be made by ICANN, going from the estimates I heard in the room last night were $60 million to $800 million. Is the structure of ICANN moving towards a for-profit structure, and what is the future of that money? I mean, if each meeting is only about $500,000 in expenditure, where is that funding?
Well, no, we certainly are not moving towards a for-profit structure. We're a dedicated non-profit and remain so, and will remain so. The first thing to say is that the project itself has cost us something in the order of in excess of $14 or $15 million over the last few years in terms of the research, etc. The economic studies, for example, have been called for. I think Rod can perhaps help with us, but we're looking at close to $1 million worth of expenditure, for example, on economic.
Just on the last study, close to
the last study,
yeah.
So, there's a considerable sunk cost by ICANN in that project, and the application fee has been reasonably carefully calculated, including through the Board Finance Committee, to be on a cost recovery basis. Now, there's a reasonably large sum in that fee based around risk and risk assessment, and that's some of that's litigation risk and other risks. So as the program moves through, we're only talking about starting the first round. We have in mind multiple rounds. As those rounds go open, the fee is very likely to come down. So by the time we get to the kind of large numbers of applications that some people are talking about, the fee may very well be much lower than it is at the moment. We'll get better at it. In other words, the evaluation panels that we have set up to run through these things, they will get better at it, and we'll get more information about what it actually costs to run these things. So I think you should take all those sorts of numbers with a very careful, very large grain of salt. The next thing is, if there are any surpluses that come into ICANN as a result of that exercise, the community will be the people who decide how that should be spent. And I think there's already lots of interest from the developing world as to how some of that surplus might be spent in assisting impecunious but worthy applicants for TLDs from those regions. So no, there's no attempt. This is not a money-making exercise by ICANN. It's based on a cost recovery. If there are surpluses, the community will be the people that decide how they get spent.
And I just want to add to that. The program is being run on a cost recovery basis. There are no profits that come from it. There is a risk reserve that's being set aside, and the pricing was developed and approved through community processes. As our annual budget is developed in consultation, our strategic plan, our operating plan, and our financial plans are developed in consultation with the community every year and approved by the board, which is elected by the community. I'll also add, just to give you the factual note, our meetings cost us roughly $2 million each, and we raise additional funds for sponsorship as well, so that we can enhance the quality of the meetings and accommodate the growing size.
I have an online question from John Markoff of the New York Times. A question about ICANN and the International Telecommunications Union and the future of Internet governance. What are your respective views about the role of ITU going forward?
Since I took over as chair, I've worked quite hard to meet with the ITU. I went and had a very good session, for example, soon after I was elected, with Secretary General Touré at his offices in Geneva. And we've invited the ITU to come and speak, and we've had shared platforms on many topics, including at the IGF, and I'm thinking in Sharm el-Sheikh, for example. And we've seen, I think, a very good relationship developing between us and the ITU on this area. More recently at the ITU Plenipot, there was some recognition in some of the ITU documents about the ICANN role and its coordination function. So I think what Secretary General Touré has always said is that the ITU should concentrate on what the ITU was set up to do, and ICANN should do ICANN's job. And I think that's pretty much my view. We're fairly clear what our role is. It's relatively narrow. It's the technical coordination of these internet names and numbers and some other related functions. And it's very different from what the ITU does. And where we do have some intersections, and there are some intersections where our policies come together, then we're on some number of joint working groups, and we have reasonably good relationships. Many of the same people who work with us in our working groups work on ITU working groups. So I think things are moving forward. We regard them as a very important player in the ecosystem, and I think relationships are probably better than they've been. I suppose Rod just reminded me of the other thing that I always think is so obvious that doesn't need to be said, and that is that the ITU is a functioning member of ICANN. There are three places in the ITU structure where the ICANN structure where the ITU has a role under the bylaws. They have, for example, a position, I think, on the nominating committee. They have their membership in the GAC, and we right now have an ITU liaison on our board. So there's a number of institutional relationships with the ITU.
Peter, this is clearly aimed at you. Can you give us any insights as to what any board action may be regarding .xxx on Friday?
Yes, I'm happy to say that that's back on the agenda for the board for a vote this Friday. I'm not clear what the board is going to do, and I don't speak for them. There'll be another vote. Historically, those votes have been reasonably interesting. They've been quite close. They've raised a number of issues, and it's been one of those topics, I think, after which we've had more board members wanting to go speak and go on the record explaining their rationale for their views than previously. That may well be the same this time, but yes, it's on the agenda for Friday.
I was just going to ask about .jobs and the steps taken with them, and what is the next phase of that? What can we expect?
Well, first, it's the second time in ICANN history, I believe, that we've issued a breach notice to a registry. Last time was in 2003, and I think it reflects our very serious commitment to compliance and contractual compliance with registries and registrars. And I will not speculate on next steps. And if you want to have a more in-depth discussion, I would ask our general counsel, who the compliance team reports to. I would have him speak with you.
Can I just come back to the question about XXX? One of the other things we're doing with the GAC here, of course, is having a bylaws consultation with the GAC about XXX. And so I was assuming, speaking before, that we will have had that consultation with the GAC and will have worked through understanding what the GAC advice is. There's always the possibility, I guess, that we will have reached a difficulty in doing that in relation to the GAC.
Rod, you've been criticised recently for hiring a weight loss guru as the new VP of Organisational Effectiveness, especially when the posts of Chief Security Officer and Chief of Staff, VP of Europe, Ombudsman, and 11 other posts are vacant. Can you promise the community that you won't create any new VP posts before the existing posts are filled?
No, absolutely not. We are always searching. We always have positions open, and there's no relationship between the hiring of a vice president for organizational effectiveness and those other positions. I mean, they're separate processes. And Elad Levinson is a accomplished professional with a proven track record, and he came in as a part-time consultant initially, and the team was so enthusiastic about his efforts in the change area and addressing issues of cultural change and other internal processes that the team felt very strongly that he should be brought on a full-time basis, and we're very pleased that he did in January.
Kevin Murphy again. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on what you said about the GAC consultation on .XXX. When is it going to happen? What form will it take? And how, if you do choose to overrule the GAC, how will that actually happen?
It's scheduled for Thursday. We've had a reasonable exchange of papers with the GAC about that, and we're having, in fact, a pre-meeting. The suggestion is so far that we have a pre-meeting with them on Thursday about how we're going to talk about it, and then we go into the talk about it, and hopefully at the end of that we'll have had a decision. What we've done is isolated all the elements of GAC advice on XXX, put them together and sent them to the GAC and said, this is what, we've gone through this kind of clarifying process so that we understand and have captured excuse me, what their advice is, and then we'll be talking to them and trying to see if we can come to terms with that.
Michelle Chaplow from Andalusia.com. This morning at 7 o'clock I was invited to a meeting, Women in the DNS. This actually raised so many eyebrows that I want to say there were so many amazing women there. There was standing room only. Kieran McCarthy happened to get an invite as well. He was the only guy in the room. But I also think
no comment.
I also think we should remind ourselves that there's some amazing guys in ICANN, and this is absolutely fabulous organisation. Occasionally, I know there's a lot of conflict of interest, but occasionally I think you should all give yourselves a pat on the back.
Thank you so much for helping to end this conference on that positive note, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.